Whenever you make any kind of media-related content online, whether in print or video format, there is almost always one particular refrain that seems to find its way to your ears. Why are you taking this so seriously? Or its not too distant cousin, why can't you just enjoy something? Even back when I was writing print reviews for my high school newspaper and Facebook, or lamenting that my college newspaper had an undisclosed policy that only English majors could submit freelance work, some variation of those two phrases managed to find their way into my messages or in conversation. On some level, this is to be expected. Publishing an opinion about inherently subjective media means that, whether intentionally or not, some feathers may be ruffled or some caustic questions lobbed your way. But I'm always fascinated by the "why can't you just enjoy something" question, since it comes rife with unsung implications, which I surmise the person asking in the first place doesn't necessarily realize. So I'd like to take a quick minute, or knowing me, several, to dissect not only the sentiment of why the question is being asked, but also what the question is unconsciously revealing about viewing habits and how media is processed. Let's first place the question in its proper context. Now, I cannot say that this is universally true for everyone under all circumstances possible, but I can say with certainty that each time that I have been asked, "why can't you just enjoy something?" it has come about after I express either a middling or negative opinion about something that the other person likes. The question's foundation lies in disagreement about the overall quality of something, so there is already a gap in opinion that is understood between the two people. After all, I don't think that someone would be nearly as compelled to ask, "why can't you just enjoy something?" when you both do, in fact, enjoy the same thing. But simply having this gap is not enough. The gap needs to be wide enough that the other person takes particular umbrage with it, perhaps to the extent that the person feels that the negative or middling opinion is wrong on some fundamental level that must be confronted. This is especially true since we don't respond to every disagreement with the same degree of curiosity, aversion, or hostility. So, what else causes the reaction? It also stems from different perspectives about how a piece of media should be evaluated or consumed, which itself perhaps stems from the idea that the critic and a casual audience member's attitude towards media differ. I'll argue a little later on that that is actually untrue, but for all intents and purposes at this moment, the "why can't you just enjoy something" question implies that there are certain types of media that are not meant to be dissected and analyzed in the form of understanding character, visual aesthetic, sound, writing, and compositing. To argue that someone cannot just enjoy something, or to ask why that is the case, is to say that the entire basis on which they consumed or evaluated the media is incorrect, or that they did not watch it properly, to use a different word altogether. It's vital to make clear that this is distinct from other debates about media that might occur, such as missing certain metaphors, background contexts, or other information that is important to understand how the media is trying to function. This does, however, bring up an interesting point that I'd like to argue. Even when you're watching supposed turn your brain off entertainment or asking why you can't just enjoy something, the reality is that the person asking the question is not actually just enjoying something either. The sentiment operates on the assumption that the emotional response to the media is the only thing that actually matters, while completely discounting that your own ability to parse out why elements of the media work or don't work fuels that reaction in the first place. These thoughts, whether we're consciously or subconsciously thinking about them, tumble around in your mind as you're watching in real time and in the ensuing aftermath when you're finished. Both the critic and the casual viewer are both doing precisely the same thing, just in the form of different articulations. Just enjoy something implies that you can simply pretend that the rationale behind your feelings don't exist, or, to be more precise, that the rationale of the other person having a contrary opinion violates this thing you happen to like. It assumes that one should never ask the basic fundamental question of why the other person feels the way they do. It is incredibly ironic that the question that is sought to be demeaned is the same question being pejoratively asked by the very person who seeks to do the demeaning. As pedantic as this may sound, our brains are, short of a medical problem or death, always active, taking and evaluating information in order to reach a conclusion. turning your brain off essentially means that you wouldn't react at all to what it is that you're seeing. If you could indeed just turn your brain off, what you'd be experiencing is just a series of images and sounds that you couldn't put together in any coherent fashion. This is, of course, assuming that you'd even be mentally capable of experiencing anything anyway. Now, I obviously do not mean to imply that people are actually turning their brains off as they watch. That would be silly, although it would probably make for an interesting science fiction premise. It actually means that certain media does not require a particularly investigative thought. However, what I'm actually getting at here is that when it comes to media, turning your brain off or just enjoying something means making a virtue out of not thinking about what it is that you're seeing, or that the reason why you are responding the way that you are ultimately is insubstantial, if not outright immaterial. It inadvertently says that some media is meant purely to be consumed rather than reflective, indicative, or have another sociological or analytical function. One could reasonably argue, however, that some media are meant to be entertaining for entertainment's sake, and that there is no need for something to be profound. And that would be right on both counts. I highly doubt that anyone would take a look at two pieces of media like Jinro or Yuru Yuri and assume that they should be treated as pure equals in regards to how they use their elements to convey their stories. One is meant to be a more overtly entertaining show about cute girls hanging out in their club and getting into various hijinks with each other and their friends, while the other has more social critique and grimdark woven into its fabric. But it's important to stress that the idea of analyzing why something is good or is poor should apply to all media, regardless of whether it's a piece that's trying to say something or merely to fill out a weekly time slot. Regardless of which type of media it is, the media is likewise assembled with its own rhyme and reason, and choices are made in production concerning what will visually look good, what will be compelling writing-wise, and which sounds or musical cues will help clue the audience into whatever is happening at the moment, or in relation to the whole to get a desired reaction. The media's differing function for storytelling doesn't automatically translate to treating one as a piece to be evaluated thoroughly and the other to be given a pass. Both types demand your time and your attention. But then again, not everyone spends their time writing video essays or talking about media on the internet. This is where we come to the supposed divide between the casual viewer and the critic, that the two entities operate on such diametrically opposed methods that there is an inevitable irreconciliation between them. As I hope I've articulated at least somewhat clearly, I don't believe that the manner by which critics and casual viewers evaluate media differs to that significant an extent, at least foundationally. The critic is just like anyone else, a person witnessing this piece of media and realizing along the way whether it is something that they like or not. However, the idea of not being able to just enjoy media also seems to lie in the assumption that critics or commentators don't want to like that which they are seeing, or that they seek to deliberately pick apart, if not outright destroy, aesthetic objects. I cannot speak to every person out there who writes evaluative content on media, but I never watch something for the purposes of finding out what's wrong with it or why it's a failure. Most of the content I have made for this channel is ultimately positive in its evaluation, and part of the inherent enthusiasm I have in making content like that is precisely because I love finding out why I love something as much as I do. That likewise translates for the things that I feel negatively about. For me at least, both the idea of liking or not liking something inspires me to want to explore why I feel the way that I do, and to share that with anyone who might be curious. I feel it and share it in the hope that whatever I see next will be better than what came before. The goal is so that when someone asks me why I recommend something or don't recommend something, I'm able to articulate a reason beyond a simple, just trust me. The other aspect that some might argue for why the critic can't just enjoy something is that the critic expresses themselves for the purposes of having their reasoning being heard, admired, and to prove their own alleged media literacy superiority over others. Perhaps to a certain extent this is true. As I said in my Anime Critics and Anti-Popularity Bias video, It does take a bit of an ego to be a media reviewer or analyst and argue that your perspective is worth listening to compared to everyone else's. There's a self-assuredness, self-confidence, and even a little bluster that comes with this, myself included. I mean, I obviously want people to like what I produce in video and thought, and if I didn't truly want that, I wouldn't make content in the first place. Heck, this very video itself could be construed as me standing at the front of a classroom with a pointer and aggressively using it to point something out that will be in the exam next Friday. But the one thing that I hope has been clear from the start, especially with my more analytical content like the Bocce the Rock vs. K-On! Video, or even the anime critics and anti-popularity bias video, is that it's never made for the purposes of wanting to prove my superiority or make the viewer feel like they're being insulted. Insulting my audience, whether intentionally or under the radar, doesn't get me anything, both in terms of what YouTube cares about with analytics and in my own sense of personal satisfaction. What fun is there in being smug? My hope with everything I make is that the viewer thinks to themselves, that was worth the X number of minutes to listen to, even if they never come back and watch something else of mine again. Everything I make, from saying whether something is good or not to critiquing a particular talking point that is repeated ad nauseum, results from asking why something is. Why something is. That's ultimately what it keeps coming back to. If there is any takeaway to this long ramble, it's that the reason why I myself cannot just enjoy something is because the prospect of answering the question why is far too engrossing and fun. Media is far too fascinating to just leave it at blanket statements about something being good or poor, or to engage in discussions where justifying why something didn't work for you is somehow met with derision. Dare yourself to take a look at the things you think you just enjoy, and ask yourself why that is. I suspect that the more time you ponder, the more you'll actually come to love even more that which you already love. That way, if you're like me and you rewatch Riding Bean for the 10th time, each time around you'll feel something newer and more intriguing than before. This has been ZNote of ZNoteTaku. Happy viewing, everyone.